Yeah, yeah. That's my sister.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Nope, that's not me. Yep, that's wrong one. Wrong one of us.
So if you don't know why this fucking rest, you don't have the email that I sent for the Wi-Fi code anymore.
Oh, did you send it like to everybody in the world?
I think it's into the board, yeah. Everybody, this is how the sausage is made. This is how we get all this stuff.
Right.
What's the official name of this event?
Crafting front-end style dust.
I don't know. I don't even remember anymore. I don't remember who thought of. I mean, we thought of some gems for this talk. I think that one might have been Brian.
What root? Somebody ran into it? Yeah. Anything that really breaks this thing, took everything I had.
Interesting pharmaceutical product.
I can pull it up in my email. On the pizza here. This is Ryan. Hi. Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll be down in just a minute. Sorry? Yes, at the 37th and Walnut entrance.
Now, I don't know how small it is.
That's exactly where we are.
Oh, you are kidding.
Yeah, if you hang out there for about 5 minutes, we'll be right out.
Two things are.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you so much. All right, bye. I can do this real quick. This is from Karen.
Is that Brian?
This is my laptop.
Okay. I could go in there and see those last 2 points, but
Yeah, that's the catch-22 by the start.
As a journalist, I can help. Like, that's why
so is it you?
Yeah, I'm just looking for this Wi-Fi code.
All right.
see
Oh, here it is.
When did you send it?
I found it.
You got it? Okay, cool.
well, I'll get a fiscal response.
And it's not going to change, right? It's just constant.
No, this code will change every month.
Or the fiscal response.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Well, then
Sorry, can I grab some of these, 2 of these waters for us?
Oh, please,
Yeah, please.
please, in fact, please.
All right. I need to borrow 2 people to help me bring Pizza Hut.
I can
You can, yeah, okay. You should probably be checking. Yeah, could I borrow? You guys? Is that all right? Good, thank you.
Wait, you know what? I mean, when I come back, I'll just ask if anybody else.
Take care of this.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Double water. All right.
Kind of top these cigarettes, right? But they cut
WordPress.
WordPress. I need to get check in here. And I code that.
We'll just,
Whoops, I got it. Okay. Okay.
Business license.
All right.
Hi, Chris, Santoro, sorry, Santoro.
Santoro, there we go. Hi, did I get Brent?
yeah. Yeah, I know you're talking.
Brent? You must have signed up on Reebok. No, I don't think it is. Like maybe in the next hour or something.
No.
P-R-E-N-T. Really? P-R-E-N-T.
Brent.
Oh,
Last name's Hughes. Sorry.
that's nice.
With an H.
Brent.
Thank you.
Hey, Jana.
Hey, how's it going? Hi. Brian's on his way. Sounds great. I mean, I believe him. Yeah.
He's also about as good as being on time as I am.
Well, I told him that there was pizza.
Well, she knew because he is.
Oh no, I told him it was here already, and that we'll eat it all if he doesn't get here soon. Yeah.
Oh. He may be done over even as we speak.
Which is why I have faith that he's on his way.
All right, I'm gonna really. Do you have the?
Yeah, you know, there's that whole thing we have to log out and log back in, and I never received the password last pass. Ordeal. Let me see.
All right.
It's hard for me to say.
Hello, 5. Did you get your last name?
You're your last month. Yeah, I can also check the boards. Do you need signatures? Names or,
Let's say, hi. Oh, she did, all right. Yeah. Well, did you get checkers? Yes. This is. Whoever invented that, holy right now. All right, got everybody.
Yep.
We should just like be able to point them in.
HRC meshes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It'd be scary.
Or not let people unless they're wearing oranges.
Right. That would be really scary. That would make me.
Alright, now that we're past the rush. So sorry for you down there.
Yeah, it's like you have to
Shivering.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Fabric blanket. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I just I don't understand how.
Yep.
Yep. Normally it requires penalty authentication. And you have to have pensions, but then you also have to have a security number and you have to have.
It was cool. Like $65. fine, but it wouldn't stay in, right? So I was like, oh, we should just get something else. Eric? Oh, yeah. Yeah, but there are a lot of people that don't have to. Hi, I'm coming to check you in. I'm not being totally weird. Got it. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, they were talking about it.
Yeah, they brought it up during the branding.
Now you're talking about changing.
It's supposed to be someone else tomorrow. It's not like the university doesn't have safety. But it's just sort of keep it
Right. We had, I went to the University of California. There were one of my big universities. I saw them
at least that's far enough away.
You were working until like forever last night.
Oh, we've been working on this thing for like weeks now.
Right, yeah, like I know, but I was sitting there last night, like, because I was on Facebook or whatever. Go to bed, guys. Like, no, we have to finish dinner. You seem like you're significantly more conscious than I would be if I were working that way. I get like rapidly stupider and it gets later.
I mean,
Well, yeah, but like, I mean, to the extent that it's not even useful for me to be doing anything anymore. Huh?
Everybody, we got a little pizza, so feel free.
I feel bad. Like, I'm excited that I get to be here, but I also feel really bad for my friend because she was already on her way to the airport when her flight got delayed.
Oh no.
It's delayed by 4 hours.
So that the wait, why are you?
yeah, I usually don't.
Because you missed all because you weren't paying attention
I'm sorry.
to the like single email I sent 2 weeks ago that had no relevance to your life whatsoever.
It sure did.
I'll tell you my really interesting story.
Still really guy,
gonna rub it from behind, but I was like, maybe she doesn't like that. Really creepy. Really what? That would have been really creepy. I call it the boyfriend hug, but I just did. And I do it to my roommate. You should take your earrings though. They match your face. That'd be too matchy-matchy. Yeah. How are you? I'm good. I'm gonna have to leave. That picture looks good. Yeah. Are you gonna look about this top? It's gonna look even better once it's in. I haven't seen you. Yeah, I know. What the hell? Well, I'll tell you the whole story about, what happens when mommy and daddy love each other. Is that like all of it's on time? Yeah. Because I think I kind of know about that. Beginning of August. Yeah. It's really, really cute. Like, not even kidding. It's hard to believe it. I'll get there. This is being recorded. Oh. I was gonna say that might be. Yep. This is all being recorded. We get these stories wrong.
Oh! How's it going, guys? How are you doing?
Brian, Michael, Brian.
Nice to meet you, man.
Michael's working on the front end style guide course right now. Literally delivering.
Very cool. I didn't know. I was just curious. I didn't really have like a designer that had style guides, so I had to slide.
Hey, I mean, everyone has to
To be honest, you don't need a full-time one.
So I'll be calling out sometime this month. You were calling.
Hi.
How'd you get hooked up with this guy?
I suggested it and you wrote yourself.
That may be more accurate. Yeah, right. Nothing. That's like everything looks yeah.
Everything looks acceptable at this point.
I'm guessing no update. I'm just gonna assume no update. I'm gonna very good. Yeah, I'm gonna start another one. But it's with the whole
Nah. Yeah. I don't really eat beforehand. There's no effort. It's supposed to be like
for real. But they didn't sign, but it's they said it's started. Me and Andrew, the help. So it's all internal until they decide that it's gonna be. We don't know. They might assign like dates like at a time where the bed is available.
so it might go internal.
It's definitely internal. We just don't know which internal team. Right now it's not stated. Unless like our tables do.
Whoa, long time then. How's everything going? Excellent, excellent. Congratulations, man. That's pretty awesome, actually.
Hey everybody, so welcome. Thank you for being here. We'll get started in about 10 or 15 minutes. Everybody have pizza, that's awesome. Use this time to network and enjoy being here. Thank you for coming. We'll be in touch. Yeah, right. 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah,
There's a way to bring what's up. Right now I can't see the rest of my screen.
yeah, let's try that. Can you handle VGA? Do you have an adapter by chance?
What do you need?
No. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry about it. This
being upgraded next cycle. So they're slowly upgrading so that all the things actually have the I don't understand. I honestly don't understand why some of these don't have 18. Everything on the second floor has 18.
Well, this is your water bottle. This is mine. I don't know how we'll differentiate that. Oh, mine over there. Jana? Jana Veliskova? I'm a front end engineer. It's a pretty broad role. So I do everything from UX research, which is pretty soft skills, all the way to Angular. I mean, it's just a lot of work. Yeah. Are you here? Are we recording?
Yeah.
I used to work on How's that going? What platform is the new one being supported? Oh, okay. Oh, don't hate me. We're gonna hate on this stuff in a bit. I really thought she was bringing me a soap. Yeah. Well, that sounds like fun. Yeah, it was really fun.
All I know is that
No, I'm actually for body. Make sure that nobody will have that's why it's
I don't want to hear anything about
everybody, we have run out of
Every time I come
Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to another PANMA event. We brought some good weather. Thanks whoever's responsible for that. Appreciate it very much. Really tired of winter. I'm Reed Vesco. I'm on the board of the Philadelphia Area Media Association, or PANMA. And I'd like to ask this question: how many people have never been to a PANMA event before? Ooh, wow. Welcome all of you. Really glad to see you, and we hope that you enjoy this and come back for our many other events that we'll have over the course of the year. Tonight we're going to learn about making front-end style guides, and in April we'll have a presentation by Fred Freeman on virtual reality. That will be up on the website. You'll be able to register for it probably tomorrow morning. And in May, Ryan will tell us a little bit about something we're making an annual event, a show and tell. So, Ryan?
Yes, so on the last Thursday of May, it's always the last Thursday, we'll be doing a show and tell. Last year was our first annual, I guess it wasn't annual as of last year, but this will be our second annual PANMA show and tell. So it'll be a lightning talk style, lightning talk format. We're looking for people to present ideas, to give talks on. The format will be 7 minutes per person, and then at the end we'll have audience participation, or audience vote, and we'll raffle off some prizes based on the audience's vote. So that's coming up. And I also wanted to let everybody know, I'm sorry that we don't post this on the invite. We really should let you guys know this happens on the invite, but we'll let you know now. After these events, we'd like to head over to William Street Common, which is the renamed Dreamers West, renamed and reopened, and much nicer inside. So we'll head over there around 8 o'clock or whenever we finish, and we will continue the conversation there.
Okay. Brianna Morgan, also on our board. As is Ryan Sullivan.
We got very formal in here all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So we have been mentioning over the past couple of months that Reed and Liz have been working on a redesign for the PANMA website. And I've seen what it's going to look like, and part of what is on the new site is a lot of space for some new sponsors. Since we're about ready to launch the website, we are looking for some new sponsors, and if you're interested in supporting us as an organization, please talk to me after the talk tonight.
Okay. Right. For those of you who are unfamiliar with PANMA, we've been around since 1996, and we present content that's of interest to the digital development community in all its many forms. Designers, developers, content producers, people who make databases, people who work with code, people who work with Photoshop, anything like that is involved with internet development. We're trying to bring good content and some networking opportunities to what we think of as our community. And as I said, that's been going on since 1996, which is through several up and downs of the tech economy. We hope it stays up. That's who we are. Our site is panma.org, and it will soon be better looking, finer, greater panma.org. And the presentation tonight is on crafting front-end style guides, and I'm very grateful and happy to have Crumley and Jana Veliskova here, two of the best front-end people in Philadelphia, to teach us, and you can learn from them, pick their brains. They'll speak for an hour or so, or more. Yeah, probably a good hour. For some questions and answers, and I'm sure there's a great deal to be learned from it. So, Brian and Jana, thank you guys.
We have a question in the back. Sorry.
I
was gonna say, wow.
That was quick.
Always being friends.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a few strikers that'll come in, but we'll get them all caught up.
We do have a lot of information for you tonight, so I would like to encourage you to just hold your questions until the end so that we can just get through this, and we will have time for Q&A. So Brian is going to start us off.
We're going to be moving in fifth gear to make this happen in time. So, thank you everybody for coming out on one of these first beautiful evenings we've had this year. It's quite a testament to have so many new faces as well as old faces from different PANMA events. So we're going to be talking about why we feel it's important to craft front-end style guides.
So a little bit about myself. I'm a front-end engineer at RJ Metrics, and I specialize on the product side, and my role kind of spans from UX researcher all the way to AngularJS development. I really, really like well-structured applications, clean, dry code, and a very collaborative work environment. And in my spare time, I really like board games, foraging in the woods, and competitive Latin and ballroom dance. Although I have not been doing that for a while, for a few months. Yeah. So I work at RJ Metrics. We have about 100 people now. We're located at Broad and Chestnut. And what we do is we provide business intelligence software, which allows clients to connect various data sources, create reports, keep and manage all connections within our data warehouse. And clients can then make business decisions based on the analysis of all of this data. And we're currently hiring for QA engineers, software engineers, all the way from intern to senior positions, product designer. This person would work very closely with me, marketing designer, account managers, and more. So if you're currently looking, definitely hit me up after this talk, and I can tell you a little bit more about the positions and about RJ Metrics. And we have Natalie here as well, and she could definitely tell you about some of those positions too. And here is Brian.
And got to follow in those footsteps. My name is Brian Crumley. I'm a lead front-end developer and UX practitioner with a agency in Fishtown. I've worn a bunch of different hats over the years. I've done design, I've done development, had some very regretful run-ins with Flash in the past, but I've actually settled very nicely in as a front-end UX. I've really kind of found my passion in that. As I mentioned, I work for O3 World. This is a shot of our semi-newish office in Fishtown here in Philadelphia. We're a digital product design and development agency. It's perfect for my ADD when it comes to projects. Excuse me, because we get to work on some really unique problems for a very diverse group of clients. Some of them SEI, a wealth management company, Temple University, the White House Historical Association, Five Below. We are also hiring for a few positions, so just forget what you just heard from Jana. We're looking for a UX strategist, UI designer, developers, both front end and back end, and we're also looking for a marketing strategist. So if any of them kind of fit what you're looking for, grab me after the talk.
I've got to interrupt for a minute just because we're doing this. Wharton is also hiring. Right here that Brian's going to get rid of probably right now. So. But,
all right. Enough of that. Enough of the sales pitch. Except for this one, actually. We are also the organizers of Forge Conference. Thank you. It's a UX and product design focused conference. This will be our second year. We're actually holding it here on Penn's campus at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, I believe it's called. Beautiful, beautiful space. We're really excited about it. So we've got some awesome speakers lined up already. We've got some folks from Etsy, Google, Big Spaceship, an agency up in New York, and we'll be announcing quite a few more in the coming weeks. So tickets are on sale now. Check out forgeconf.com if you have any questions, hit me up afterwards. Just to kind of like make sure that we can keep an eye on everything, we're doing a hashtag tonight, Style Guides for the Win. You've probably seen us rambling on about it over the course of the week. Feel free to share any love, questions, ire that you might have about the talk. We expect this to be trending at least in Philadelphia in about an hour, so help us out a little bit here. So before we dig in too deep with the Style Guide side of everything, I want to find out a little bit about who's hanging out tonight. Who here is a developer? All right. Evidently, they're not allowed to sit in the middle. Designers? Okay. UX? You people? See a couple hands just going back and forth. All of the above? Get a little bit of everything? All right, yeah. None of the above. All right, what else do we have?
Marketing.
Marketing?
Ghostwriter.
Ghostwriter, all right. But you said writer at first. What is it?
Restaurant project manager.
Actually, there's one more.
What else do we have? Project manager.
Project manager. Okay. Well, we're not really going to be digging into too much code tonight, so I think everybody should be fairly comfortable with what we're talking about. It's really going to be about the ideas and methodologies and benefits behind producing front-end style guides. So I want to start off real quick with a quote. Websites are systems rather than pages, and as soon as we can stop perceiving them as that, the better off we will all be as people that are practicing internet development. Pages have unique content. You might have a handful of layouts, but the same elements and components are shared across all of these different pages. Here it looks the same on one page as another page, maybe some slight variance or something. What we're talking about is building a design system. It's a series of layouts where our page is built up of these individual components. So instead of going through and designing page after page after page of how all these layouts are going to come together, we're going to have a series of templates that go through and define how all of these individual elements and components can come together into these different layouts. So quick story time. A couple of experiences that Jana and I have had that kind of led up to the realization we needed to kind of share our thoughts about this, how we kind of saw the light. Mine in particular was a bit of a false start, actually. I started with O3 about 2.5, 3 years ago now, and this is actually a version of our old website. We just launched a new one a few weeks ago. Design was producing page designs, pretty much what you would expect. You might have a full page, a mobile, tablet view. They were producing a lot of designs. This particular site had, I think, 45 individual comps for different breakpoints. And I translated that into, switching projects. I translated that into something that looked similar to this thing on the left here that runs about a mile long. Single page with every single front-end element that might actually be needed to go through and construct the different layouts. You can mix and match. Yeah, it seemed like a good idea when I first started. You see at the top here, we're looking at some different header options. About a mile and a half down, we're looking at some different header layouts. Here's another one for Temple University with some buttons. And the reason we were doing this, we knew we needed a single source to go through and help us define what the elements that we were constructing were. As a front end, I was going through and constructing something like this that I could hand off to our back end, and he was able to go through and wire this into his CMS. It was the best that I knew how to do at the time to get the best of both worlds. This one here looks like a full page layout, but going through and doing this didn't really feel right. It felt like something was a little bit off in the way that we were going through and building things. And it wasn't until this more recent application project that we've been working on that I realized what it was. We've been actually ideating on this for about 1.5 years now. And I started the same way, but I quickly realized as we were ideating through different layouts and different ideas and different features, we needed a bit more guidance in how we were going through and sharing this information. There was a little bit of consistency lacking, actually. Despite having everything right here, the way that an element might appear in one section was a little bit different than another. It didn't help the team learn anything when we were going through and building it. I knew it. I built the thing. I spent hours working on it. But the other team just kind of knew what was in front of them. And over time, it became a little bit inflexible, in all honesty. It became hard to go through and adapt an element from one section to another because it became a little too reliant on the layout that it lived within. So we needed a tool that could better facilitate conversation, something that design, development, business could all speak and reference intelligently when we had to have conversations about how to go through and build the site. What we needed, what we learned, was that we needed living documentation of how to build our front ends.
So my experience was a tiny bit different. I came from an agency background, and when I started at RJ Metrics, it was really my first time working on an in-house team. And the benefit of working in an agency background, there were established methods of doing things. We had style guides galore. Everything was great. I came over to RJ Metrics. I was expecting the same thing, and I was wrong. So when I got to RJ Metrics, I realized that I've been taking style guides for granted. And that fateful day when I had to update existing code that already was living within the RJ repo, I realized there was no style guide. There were no writing standards for, there were no coding standards for the front end code. And everything was a mess. Code was duplicated. It wasn't dry. It was all over the place. Styles were getting replicated. It just looked awful. And so I needed a way to kind of consolidate everything and to keep it, to keep my sanity. And really, I rediscovered the style guide. And what I took for granted before, I really began to appreciate a lot more. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll be covering.
Yeah, so a few of the things we're going to touch on tonight. Evolution of style guides. Where have style guides been, and how are we kind of going to evolve them to the next point? How are these front-end style guides different from what you might be familiar with in print and brand and things like that in the past? What are some of the benefits of going through and building them? We'll get into ideas about how to go through and best implement them, and then Jana and I will share some personal experiences that we've had with some style guides that we're actually working on right now. So what is a style guide? Most of you are probably familiar with the more traditional kind of print style guide. Defines things like logo spacing, color, typography, brand guidelines, and definitions. But there's actually quite a few different flavors of style guides.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of those flavors. So tonight we're going to be focusing on the front-end component style guide. But for the next few slides, we'll talk about examples of style guides and their purposes in other realms. And some of those purposes might be overlapping, but each one was designed with a specific purpose in mind. And we need to keep that in mind when we're developing the front-end style guide. You need to determine what your purpose as a developer and a designer is, and then that will determine what kind of style guide you'll need. Brian is going to now go over some of the more traditional style guides, which you may or may not have seen. He's going to start us off with the New York City Transit Authority.
Yeah, so this one's actually pretty old. It's a brand style guide. You can actually hit it at thestandardsmanual.com if you want to check it out. Timeless, incredibly detailed, but definitely not for making websites. As you can tell, it is photos of a binder full of printouts. I'm not even entirely sure the internet existed when this was first put together. So, great reference for the brand side of things, but not exactly what we're looking for from a front-end standpoint. This one from Adobe goes in a little bit deeper. This was a pretty extensive one. I don't remember how many pages it was off the top of my head, but fairly extensive PDF. Gets into a lot of usage specifications, verbiage. This particular page is talking about all the different ways that Adobe can use their logo because no one else is allowed to use this version of it. Great brand ideas, but very little content that actually helps us go through and architect the site. Same idea, BlackBerry. This one is actually very similar, and by that I actually mean that it's about 53 pages of PDF, where about 3 pages of it are actually useful. In this particular one, this is some of their imagery guidelines. It's mostly white people smiling at their BlackBerries, which is really misleading because I don't know if you've been around like people with BlackBerries that very rarely ever actually smile at them. They usually look very angry. These traditional style guides, these just aren't going to cut it. The reason is because they focus on the wrong thing. They're looking at design, brand, copywriting, and these are important, but they're not really what we need to go through and be constructing our front end. We need a map of the elements and patterns that we're going to use to construct the site. They're also incredibly difficult to maintain because they're static. PDF is probably out of date before it even reaches your inbox. And then you've got a random assortment of versions of this PDF floating around, which may or may not be the definitive version that you should be working from.
So now we're going to move a little bit closer to what we'll be delving into more, the prescriptive front-end style guides. And these style guides include actual code. There's generally no PDFs or screenshots. They include examples of how and when to use this code. But what do I mean by prescriptive? So what I mean by that is that the information flows in one direction. So someone, possibly a designer or one front-end developer, they sat down and they kind of put it together and said, here you go, this is what you're going to use, and that's it, have fun. So let's take a look at some of these. So this is a list of parts. This is something that a lot of you in the room might be familiar with, some of you may not. But this is how you should be writing your list of part articles. And the reasoning behind that is they want consistency throughout the site. front-end developers who constantly need communication with our style guide. This would not be the best kind of style guide. But as you can see on this one, they talk about types of images that are used, the different widths of images, using code blocks, headlines. All of those things are covered within this particular style guide. And it's really about how to write these articles so they can accept external submissions. Next, the Twitter brand style guide. Again, very prescriptive style guide. And its purpose is to have consistency across the Twitter brand. It's not really reusable. These are all functional and not descriptive colors, so you can't really go back and forth and kind of draw on those colors and create your own, or go back into the style guide and say, oh, I need these shades of gray for these borders. So it definitely fulfills its function again, but not exactly what we're looking for. So let's move one step closer. This is the RJ Metrics marketing style guide. It creates reusable grid systems, as you can see right there. It talks about forms and different types of elements, your nav bar. But the problem with it is that it's not living code. It's not tied into any code. It's still very much prescriptive. And it works for our marketing team since their site changes pretty often. But again, it just kind of sits there and nobody updates it. And so you're always dealing with this static document. So what's missing? What's missing, Brian?
Let me tell you a little bit about what's missing. What would help us go through and actually craft better front-end style guides? We talked about some of the issues on one end. There's a couple here.
Yeah, we can move. I'll move it.
So what do we actually need? We talked about what isn't going to work for us. What ideally would we have if we were going through and constructing a front-end style guide? We'd be avoiding code regression. We would be blowing up elements that were existing on the site when we were adding something new. We'd improve the visual consistency of elements. We'd be aiding in the user's experience with more consistency across the elements. We'd be able to keep our code size down because we'd be hopefully keeping things a little bit drier, avoiding bloat. We'd educate our team members. We'd be able to provide supportive documentation that they could work from when they're going through and designing and developing new pieces of the site. We'd be able to keep maintenance time down, be a little bit easier to maintain when we have all these elements just sitting there waiting for us. And then hopefully we're able to keep style guide use up. And by that I mean going through and actually having the team actively referencing it and contributing to it as we're working through different phases of the project. So knowing what we need, prepare to have your minds blown, because front-end style guides, this is where front-end style guides are going to shine. Jana and I, we're going to be self-quoting a lot tonight, just for reference. So this is kind of Jana's and my definition of what a style guide is. It's a living document. Again, we're not talking about static PDFs or anything, and it's specific to a particular website to enhance communication. We're talking about communication between the entire team: designers, developers, project managers, stakeholders, and it's going to aid in the consistency of the site and the maintainability of the code. But the style guide isn't actually going through and defining your coding standards. It's built on your coding standards. It's built on your best practices. But those are going to be defined outside of your style guide. Each style guide is going to be unique to the actual client project that you're working on. And Jana will talk a little bit about standards themselves real quick.
That's right. That isn't to say that coding standards aren't important. In fact, they're the foundation of your style guide. And really what we want to do with coding standards is we want to fight bad code. CSS is very loose. It's very visual. So you need something to kind of say, okay, well, this is how we're going to write it. There's a million different ways to write CSS, and consistency here is really key. You really need coding standards in order to have good communication across the team, so that your code looks like just one person wrote it. So many ways to write CSS, and if 5 different people write, the same block of code, and there are no standards, it'll look like 5 different people wrote it, and that's no good for project maintenance. So how do about things such as spelling and grammar, citations, bibliographies, and it's like the print equivalent of coding standards. And we're all pretty familiar with the Chicago Manual of Style and the MLA Style Manual, especially from our grade school and high school days. And they're really your best practices on how to kind of write, and so the equivalent is your best practices on how to write code. If we look at the Elsevier Health Sciences style guide, this is kind of similar. So, in order to move forward, you have to ask yourself, well, you have style, but do you have those standards? You need those in order to create the style guide, because otherwise, your style guide is going to be all over the place. So going back to the previous example, to Elsevier, this explains exactly how you should be writing. And Elsevier and other publishing houses have these standards in order to maintain consistency in their publications. A lot of journals require this. So if you submit papers to journals, you have to follow those standards as well so that the brand has consistency across the board. And the same thing applies to your code. You don't want too much differing code. And, you know, what's consistency without some contradiction? The consistency is the last refuge of the unimaginative. Unfortunately, when we're trying to write these coding standards, we don't want to be imaginative. We want it to look like another person could have written it. We don't want to be too creative with our code, because that means that nobody else can go back and ever update it. So what should your coding standards cover? Property order, your naming standards, white space, shorthand numbers, commenting, file structure, object-oriented CSS, preprocessor basics, and all of those things should live in their own separate guide. This should not be a part of the style guide. Instead, the style guide should be based on that. So why is this important? Well, what we really want to do is we want to prevent this. Let's play a game. Who can spot what's wrong with the top picture?
Come on, code people. Don't let us down.
One line they've got the button ending underneath the button, others they don't.
So that actually like wraps around. Sorry, that like.
Oh, okay.
So the line. Yeah, no. It's my screen is a little slow. What?
Oh, you're
Yes. Yes. That was pretty awful. I tried that day. So there's a block level element. There's a div inside the span, and I looked at this and I'm like, who wrote this? And then this little comment over here, refactor this ASAP. So, you know, you go to get a little git blame action. Oh, my boss, 2 years ago. All right, boss, I'll remember this the next time you need something ASAP. And look at this, it's 8 levels deep. I mean, how are you ever going to override your background colors? Like, that's a little ridiculous. And when you encounter code bases that don't have coding standards, you'll run into this stuff all the time. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. So, what are some of the benefits of the front-end style guide, Brian?
Not gonna lie, it takes a little bit of time to go through and build something like this. As you can see, you know, you're not talking about just simply going through and producing a style guide. You really need a coding standard foundation to build it on. You need an understanding of how you want to go through and architect this, and it's something that's more of a company-wide kind of thing, project-wide kind of mentality. But I think you're already starting to see some of the long-term benefits of investing this little bit of extra work. So let's talk about a few of the ones that are kind of the key benefits. Increasing site performance. I'm a big web performance person. The folks that I work with can kind of attest to how much I just ramble on endlessly about keeping our sites as performant as possible. And the simplest concept in web performance is that smaller files download quicker. So having a style guide as your reference for code helps us write drier code. We're not going to be repeating ourselves as often when we're going through and writing things like this, because we have a reference of all of the elements and components that make up our site right in front of us. Ultimately, the fastest CSS that you can write is the fastest CSS is the CSS that you don't have to write for the project. An improved user user experience. A style guide helps keep the UI cleaner, more consistent. You're going to have fewer snowflake elements floating around in the interface that you have to somehow keep track of, or that users have to go through and decipher, is that the same as the button that I just saw, on the previous screen. And we'll talk a little bit about how to find those particular snowflakes in a little bit. You're also able to make more informed decisions about the value of new elements. So, again, to help provide a little bit of clarity for the user, make decisions around, do we need a new element? Are we extending an element? Does this element belong in this design system that we've gone through and established? How else? Onboarding team members. Getting the team comfortable with a site isn't easy, whether it's design, development, strategy. Having a living guide of elements helps onboard people faster. They're able to go through and look at this and see not only what it looks like and what elements make up the site, but they're also looking at code samples, and they're able to speak a little bit more intelligently about the individual elements and components that make up the system itself. Intimate knowledge of the build is no longer completely necessary to get spun up when working with the project. And the result of having more consistent UX and this living documentation is improved efficiency. Wireframes become more valuable assets in the production of your site. Less time in Photoshop is needed. Developers are able to go through and actually start to construct pages from the wireframes and from the elements that have already been established. You're still going to have designers that need to go through and create unique elements, special elements for this particular update, but it's going to speed up the way that we're able to go through and actually work together to get those into a particular layout. And fewer design hours in Photoshop, easier implementation for developers, for the few PMs in the room, that should really sound like music to your ears, because that means faster delivery for your projects. Another benefit, building a shared vocabulary. How many times have you been in a meeting where you're ideating around let's say a new idea or a new feature for a site, and everybody's just kind of sitting there smiling and nodding at each other like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, we got this. And everybody retreats to their individual corners and works on this idea, and you come back together and it's like everybody was speaking an entirely different damn language when we had this meeting. I know it's happened in here, come on. A style guide helps to go through and actually create a consistent design vocabulary so that when the team is talking about elements that they want to evolve or add or improve on the site, we all know that we're talking about the exact same thing. Demonstrating interactions. This is great. This is traditionally design tools. They're static. They're not going to go through and actually provide an easy way to convey interactivity in a layout. With a tool like Photoshop, you're clicking layers on and off or something, trying to be like, yeah, when I click on it, like it's going to change to this color gradually. Or even worse, in the haste of designing something, some of these element states might even be completely overlooked in the build. So your living style guide can be a reference for the interactions, the animations, the transitions that you would like to have happen at different points in the interface. And then finally, everybody's favorite part of development is QA, right? It's not, sorry. I'm not the only one to have built a component thinking that I just built this beautiful thing that works perfectly and that I've blown something up on the other side of the site and I don't even realize it because I didn't have a single reference to look at and know that I had done that. A style guide isn't going to remove the need for you to have human eyes on the overall site and to test individual pages, but it does give us a single place to go through and keep an eye on how we're evolving the overall system that we're building. We no longer have elements that are floating out there on a random page one time that are affected because we made an update to an element 3 pages away from that. So let's look at a couple of examples real quick of style guides in the wild. Several companies have been kind enough to go through and actually put their style guides out on the web publicly for people to kind of check out and see what references they use for their teams. Code for America is a great kind of early example that came out. This one's entirely focused on elements, components that make up the site. This isn't really much as far as brand or content guidelines or anything like that. And they also have great individual code examples for each element. One of the most popular ones, MailChimp's, they actually just updated, I think, in the last couple months or so. They used to have one that was kind of like a solid bar on the left side. This one, incredible organization, great samples. They really kind of touch on everything. you could almost go through and rebuild MailChimp's interface with the style guide that they make public for everybody. Lonely Planet, another great example. They actually divvied up into more base design elements. They have an immense amount of iconography, so they have a section specific for that. And then they also have some UI samples, components. They have JS interactions that they share on the site as well. Salesforce, another great product like MailChimp. Both are apps. For both of them, having a consistent UI is incredibly important. One of the unique things about Salesforce is somewhere over here that I cropped off. There's a button that you can actually see an in-browser rendering of an iPhone or an Android device. And you can actually see what some of the elements and components look like in a mobile capacity right in your browser. So kind of a nice little feature that they added. BBC's global experience language. This one is really definition-based, much more about content and brand and style. Not as many living code examples in this one. But it does have great information about how to go through and serve content, write content for all of the different platforms that the BBC is on currently. Yelp, they have theirs divided up actually between UI elements and different patterns and brand guidelines. Again, they have like incredible code samples. If you scroll down the page, you can see some of the way that they divvy it up. I definitely recommend going and checking out some of these. We'll make the slides available afterwards. The URLs are up there and real tiny, but we'll make it available so you can check out some of these individual ones. And then finally, Starbucks. Another incredibly comprehensive style guide, but a little bit more clinical in its presentation. It really just goes to show you that this style guide, does not need to be beautiful to be usable. This pretty much covers a lot of the core elements of the Starbucks brand inside of it, as well as element and component samples and interactivity. So it doesn't need to be an incredibly well-designed piece of or I guess resource for you, just as long as it's usable. So first things first, as with any new ideas, we're going to need to try and get a little bit of buy-in. We're going to need to convince people of the value of this. I think we see the benefits that we just covered, but we need something maybe a little bit more tangible, something to demonstrate the value of them. So one of the first things that I did when I was going through and trying to demonstrate this was performing a UI audit. I needed ammunition. I needed to be able to demonstrate to people the benefits in a more concrete way to both our internal team as well as our stakeholders. We're talking about time that they're going to be paying for to have us evolve this experience. That isn't necessarily adding a component to their site. And this is where the UI audit really kind of shines. There's a couple different options depending on level of comfort with development, composition of your team. In a development-heavy environment, you probably want to go through and do a code audit. You want to go through the CSS and evaluate, what kind of anybody here familiar with linting your CSS? Yeah. You probably want to go through and review element names and conventions and how you're going through and instantiating these different pieces. How are elements building on top of each other? For teams that are maybe a little bit more of a shared discipline, maybe design heavy, it's best to go more of a visual audit route. So the sample right. Depending on what you find, either of these can result in what we in the web world technically call a gaslight. It's incredibly laborious to go through and perform either of these kinds of audits. It takes hours upon hours to go through and perform these evaluations. Definitely skewed more on the code side of things as being a little bit more. But it's a humbling experience. It's educational, especially if you are new to a team, like Jana was when she stepped into her project. Getting some perspective on what has come before you and how you move forward constructively is incredibly important. So how do we go through and perform a visual UI audit? Get your screenshotting fingers ready because we're going to be navigating the entire site and we're going to screenshot every single element, component, piece of text, whatever we find, and talking like headers, form elements, that kind of stuff. And we're going to organize them into an audit document. And what we're gaining by going through and doing this is we're able to put them side by side and gain some perspective about the subtle, more nuanced differences that there might be between all of these different elements that might be overlooked when you're looking at it on one page and you click 3 pages forward and you're like, That was pretty close. That's good enough. It's not good enough. Go through and really take a look at how many different sizes, how many different color treatments, how many different composition the button might have or form might have, and really gain some perspective around what makes up this experience. I thought the idea of a UI audit was actually pretty original, but of course, as happens with most people, Brad Frost beat me to it. He was writing about this idea about a year ago. He calls his an interface inventory. If you're interested in reading a little bit more about kind of the methodology behind it, definitely check out this article. I highly recommend it. He also has a great starting template that you can download. It's a Keynote file, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. It basically is set up to go through and give you sections to drop in typography elements, images, media, tables, forms. And this is what you can use as your ammunition to take to your team, to take to your stakeholders and be like, look, we need to dig a little bit deeper. We need to think a little bit more about how we're constructing our front ends.
So now that you have the audit, you can actually go ahead and get your stakeholders buy-in. So what you need to do is champion for cleaner, clearer code with your stakeholders, for consistent code, for well-documented code. Because when you have bad and dirty code and repetitive code, you don't sleep well at night. You cry yourself to sleep. And your stakeholders are on your side. They want the code base to be better. They want the site to be faster. And so they want to hear from you. So who is your stakeholder? Your CEO, your manager, your VP of engineering, your clients if you're doing, freelance work. Those are all your stakeholders. And they have to realize the need for better organization of the actual code base and of what you have on your site. And it's up to you to demonstrate that need and efficiency and bring it to their attention. Since there's no way for them to actually go into the site and get elbows deep every single day, you have to bring it to their attention. And so they want to find, they want to find out those problems. They want to make the site better. So you can definitely use that as ammunition. A great way of going about it is finding out what your stakeholder's background is. So if you're working with someone, if your stakeholder has an engineering background, compare it to API. Say that it has to have good visual documentation. Just like other languages have good written documentation. Since CSS is so visual, you need to have a visual library of everything that's happening. If your stakeholder has an MBA or comes from a management background, find that thorn in everyone's side and demonstrate its deficiencies. Demonstrate how much more time it's taking up, how much more time is used up to actually go back and update the site. And get data to back you up. Run web speed tests and get a few examples of refactored code and then compare the performance to code that was repetitive and written without a style guide. And those differences might be minute, but once you have the entire repo, the differences really start to add up and make a difference. If you're dealing with a startup or a smaller company, and founders, they usually want things to be very lean, very quick. Demonstrate how a style guide could help that. Once you write something once, it goes in the style guide, you can always reuse it. And don't fall into what I like to call the bootstrap trap, because it will trap you in. If you do use a framework, a style guide still can help you keep your unique style consistent. Something like Bootstrap can really, really go the wrong way, especially if you're not documenting your changes very well. Bootstrap has a lot of extra code that you really don't need, and that can create a lot of clutter in your repo. But with good documentation and with good coding practices and standards, you can really prevent that. Then, if your stakeholder is a why did that skip? Go back. If your stakeholder is a designer, you have the same goals as a designer. They're really your allies. So you want to push for that visual consistency. You can take that style guide to your designer and say, hey, do you want to go over these components? Do you want to go over the look of these different elements? And you can really use it as a tool for communication with your designer and for really refining certain elements or certain components. Next, after you get your team member buy-in. These are the people who will be working with you. And that can be really, really tough. Because if they're used to a certain way of doing things, it's tough to convince people to do things in a completely different way. I actually got this message from one of my coworkers after I rejected his pull request for about the 15th time. He goes, hey, just in case you thought I was getting mad annoyed with this branch, I am, but not with you at all. And then he added, I've been learning and relearning a lot. I think our style guide work is going to take our product to the next level, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm like, well, that's a good sign. But getting this kind of buy-in is not easy. You have to foster a lot of communication. You have to get feedback from your team. And this is where the SEAL principle comes in. That's right, you remember that, SEAL principle. So S, solicit. You want to solicit opinions from the current developers on your team. Especially if you're newer on a team, you want to get the perspective of everyone else who has been there for a while and see, what has happened in the past, what their thoughts on the repo is, excuse me, and how you can move forward in the future. You want to encourage internal discussion about best practices and CSS structures. You want your coworkers to go up to each other and, independent from you, discuss what's going on in the planning, discuss those coding standards. Talk about their pull requests and what's the best way of writing things and how to write a component within the style guide. You want to ask for a lot of input, not just from your teammates, but from other teams as well who may have style guides. Your marketing team. You want to get input from project managers. And then lastly, listen to the feedback that you're given and incorporate it. That's a great way for making your team feel like they have ownership over the final product. And that's really important if you want that style guide to survive and to continue living and have your team iterate on it. Now, did we just make up the SEAL principle? Yes. Yes, we did. Damn right we did.
Hashtag SEAL principle.
Hashtag SEAL principle. So, before you begin the actual style guide, there's one last thing that you need to establish with your team. It's not just a prescriptive guide. Encourage the use of the words UI toolkit or pattern library or something of that sort. Words that remind your team members that it's really something that you contribute to and take out of again. And something like a toolkit or a library, it's reminiscent of a place that you go to, you donate to, and you take things out of, and you constantly interact with. Whereas a guide just sounds like somebody telling you what you're supposed to do. And that doesn't really encourage a lot of communication and discussion. So, how do you actually build the front-end style guide once you have all of this input and you have these building blocks set?
Yeah, so ideally at this point, you've got your coding standards established. They're going to be guiding the development for any style guide you're going to build at this point. You might also even have a starter set of elements to work from. So nothing too complex, just a foundation basically to go through and guide the usual elements you're going to be using on every website. From here, we can go through and actually start building our front-end style guide. So let's take a high-level look at how you might go through each of these individual elements. First things first, as Jana had mentioned before, again, another self-quote, it's important to link to the actual CSS that is running your website. This way, any changes that are actually made on the live product from a CSS standpoint will find their way back into your style guide immediately. It doesn't go through and make it so that you don't have to go through and do a little bit of maintenance here and there from an HTML standpoint, from a JavaScript standpoint, but small visual updates, revisions to elements will automatically be brought into it and keep it a little bit more up to date. But overall, a style guide needs to become a part of your workflow. It needs to be something that is constantly, as Jana mentioned, is constantly referenced, is constantly borrowed from and added to and evolved to match the product itself. So let's start with the basics. We're going to hit some of the foundational elements of the site. We saw some of these in the examples that we were looking at that were out there in the wild. stuff like color palettes. You might have, if you're familiar with SAS, you might go through and reference your variable names and hex values and maybe RGB values or something like that, along with some swatch samples. We probably have a variety of different headings in typography that you want to reference. What are the variables that reference these individual things? What are the sizes? What do the individual fonts look like when you actually bring them to the page? You probably have a sample of the grid system. You have a breakdown of how the different layouts can all come together, how you can piece all these elements back together. And from there, we can go through and start adding in some more, let's say, foundation level elements. We're talking about elements that would actually be used across the site to interact with. So we might get into a series of icons. We could be looking at table layouts, button treatments, buttons combined with icons. You might have some form elements thrown in there. I'm going to continue to add these until you've touched on the bulk of the, very kind of granular elements that would actually be used on the site itself. And the reason that we go through and do this is because of the next element that we're going to go through and do. We're going to go through and add components. And components are actually evolved from all of the individual elements that you've just created for your style guide. So some samples of what components might be. You might have a hero banner that has a multitude of buttons attached to it for navigation. You might have a primary navigation treatment. You could have, let's say, a blog teaser that is composed of an image, a title, a description, and a button. You might have a news teaser. Again, these are just kind of some examples of it, but you can kind of see how each one is getting a little bit more complex with the elements that you're adding to the style guide itself. And then finally, as we talked about, adding interactivity. Going through and actually demonstrating some of the ways that users might interact with some of these components and elements that you're constructing. In this one, we're showing off a modal real quick, but you might have things like tooltips that happen when you click on a help link, or animations that happen for accordions, transitions that happen when you hover over buttons, things like that. And it's important to remember we want to keep these individual pieces of the style guide bite-sized, especially if this is our first go-around into going through and constructing things. Yes, it's a bite-sized cookie. Calm down. You get excited.
I do.
Did you bring enough to share?
Can you just go to the next slide?
You likely can't document everything all at once, unless you're kind of going through it in a fresh process. If you're trying to go through and implement a style guide into an existing site, this is going to be something that's going to take a little bit of time to go through and get your buy-in, work with team members on it, perform your audit, and start actually documenting what all of the elements and components of the site are. So break it up in little chunks. Don't think that it has to be all in one shot or it can't be done. Work up to a complete comprehensive style guide over time. And something that Jana and I feel pretty strongly about, there's a lot of people that actually recommend that if an element or a component is used, 3 times, 4 times or something, that's when it is kind of, blessed to be a part of your style guide. And the truth is that that's a bunch of crap. If it's used even once, in our opinion, it should be incorporated into your style guide. And the reason for this is that if I'm going through building components, I'm building elements for the site, and at least the way that I am about things, I'm going to forget what I just built and added within about a day or two. It's a terrible thing. And if I'm creating these elements the first time around, then I can go back and refine them later. I can remove them later. I can evolve them later. I don't have to go hunting for them or even stumble across them because I forgot that they had been created only once and used in one kind of snowflake place. If you never put that specific component or element into your style guide, you won't know that it exists to go through and evolve with the system.
Your team members also will never know if you've created something, unless you've actually put it in the style guide. So it's really important for collaborative work. Oh, sorry.
So style guides aren't just for developers. There's different artifacts that designers and developers can use to produce, and that kind of fit into this mold as well. And again, we're talking about design systems, not necessarily page designs. So the first one we want to touch on are style tiles. Who's familiar with style tiles? Yeah? Oh, nice, awesome. Wow.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. Yeah. So Samantha Warren came up with the ideas for style guides, and it's somewhere between a mood board and a mock-up. And really, it shows off the different elements. So when Brian was talking about the kind of the granular structures that go into your style guide, this is kind of what would go into it. So you can have a style tile and have, you know, your different types of buttons on it, your headings, your paragraph styles, kind of how your images will look, some iconography, and then you can incorporate that into those granular style guide pieces. And again, you can work back and forth with a designer, and they're a very useful tool for that. A step up are element collages, and these were introduced by Dan Mall. They're bursts of inspiration and very component-based. And if we go down our style guide, after we have those granular pieces like Brian talked about, we look at our components. This is really where object-oriented CSS comes into play. So over here, you know, you have like your header and your nav, and if you have a hero image or a hero banner. Once you translate that into a style guide, you can also kind of refine what language you want to use behind all of these different components. But it really plays into, like I said, the object-oriented nature of CSS and of design, and that's fantastic to use when you're going through and really creating the more complex parts within your style guide. So make sure that you work with your designers to communicate. Listen to them, interpret, you know, help interpret what they mean by their design. Define this visual language. Is a hero image, or is it a header banner? You know, make sure that you set something and stick to it. And then iterate, evolve from the feedback. Really, your style guide needs to become a playground of sorts, that you can experiment and you can go back to your designer or your project manager or your stakeholders even and kind of show them the progress and show them what you have made. And it's a really fantastic collaborative tool. So we're going to talk about some in-progress style guides.
So Jana and I want to share just a kind of a snapshot of some of the things that we've been actively working on. You know, we are still relatively new to style guides ourselves as far as like kind of rolling our own. So we want to talk about some of the things that we've encountered going through and building these. There's a few options for how to go through and actually build a front-end style guide. Static HTML, just go straight up HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. A little bit harder to maintain, but really accessible, really easy to get into. There's a bunch of different style guide generators that are available out there, which we'll touch on real quickly at the end. Most of them are kind of based on commenting systems that you add into your code to go through and help automatically generate some of the documentation snippets that you'll actually be using. Or maybe you can go through and roll your own. Get your hands dirty, you know, try and figure out a system that works best for you for going through and managing these pieces of code. I know some people that have used WordPress, some people like to use Jekyll. It's really kind of up to you as to what you'll go through and use with it.
So like I mentioned earlier, in the past 2 years at RJ Metrics, the company's really experienced a growth spurt. And you know, the team is very dedicated, very talented, and very, very lean. And so they decided that the best solution for their front-end needs would be to use Bootstrap. And there wasn't really a lot of focus on creating documentation behind the front-end styles. So all of the front-end code was done in Bootstrap and bad Bootstrap. The code was repeated. There was one instance where some of the files were actually taken from the Bootstrap folder and repeated, copied and pasted, and then kind of refined. But the old Bootstrap folder was left in the repo, and nothing was documented. You didn't know where actual styles were coming from. So this is kind of what I was thrown into. And our management knew that they had issues on the front end. The team knew that they needed better standards and better documentation. There was no style guide. There was duplicate code all over the place, hacks like you wouldn't believe. So what I started with was by creating a project plan. And I presented it to our stakeholders, outlining the shortcomings doing a heuristic analysis of the site and kind of put together basic user experience issues, basic visual inconsistencies within the site. And I presented that as a part of my project plan. As a part of my next step, I created a coding standards guide. And I definitely did not create this on my own. My team contributed a lot to this. And that was one of the ways that I got buy-in from our team. I shared this Google Doc out with our whole development team, with our marketing team, encouraged a lot of feedback. I went out of my way, I had meetings with people. I made a presentation about how great it is to have standards for your code. And everybody was super excited, everybody was on board, but then nobody used it. And the reason I know is because I would get code reviews, and people just weren't doing the things that they were so excited about just, the day before. They weren't adhering to the guidelines. They didn't have this deeper understanding. And, at first I was really frustrated because my team was so excited about this. So what the hell? Why aren't they using these standards that I spent weeks putting together? But it really takes a lot of time to overcome these challenges and to establish a deeper understanding of the guidelines and of how to actually build good front-end code. So it requires a lot of patience, which is really hard when you're working on a very tight timeline. RJ Metrics is a very lean company. We have, 8-week project plans. We have this great project. Our engineering team is go, go, go. We get things done. We get things shipped. And we're just constantly moving, which is fantastic because we're extremely lean and we get things done fast. But it's really, really hard to incorporate change. So what I did was I had to create the style guide really piecemeal as part of our project. I started off with this very, very simple HTML solution in our code base. I consulted with our marketing team about some of the previous style guides that they've had. In the beginning, it looked a little bit sad. I had a couple of variables here and there, some headings, eventually buttons. I kind of established these sections that just said, this is where this stuff will go. Kind of future hopes and dreams for my style guide. And this was around January or so. So fast forward, the style guide is a little bit more filled out. It's a bit more functional now, kind of reminiscent of our Starbucks style guide. It's kind of ugly, but you know what? It works. It's very, very useful. At this point, it doesn't just contain those nitty-gritty elements and buttons and colors. It includes actual components as well. So we have this nice little accordion menu. I know you can't see it really well from the projector, but this is like a tab menu with different states. So those are in different interactive states of the buttons. And people actually use it. Once the style guide came up, and really during my code reviews, I was telling people, oh, if you're going to create this, it needs to go into the style guide. And that took a little bit of work. But once people got into it, they realized how much easier it was to create a new component, to reuse a button, or to reuse a drop-down menu. And so they're slowly getting into it. And in the future, I'm hoping to have more code samples using a library like Prism.js, which allows you to actually put in code snippets. CSS Tricks uses it, if you're familiar with that. I'm hoping to make it a bit more interactive and include some of our Angular directives in it as well. Right now it's pretty static, and the reason for that is I needed something, up and just quick and something I could interact with quickly. But those are some of the plans for the future. This is where it is now, and people are using it, and that's great. So now Brian's going to talk a little bit about his experience.
Okay. So my experience, in many ways, it kind of mirrors what Jana experienced. As we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, the first thing that I did, is I kind of got a little bit more excited, saw a little bit more of the value in going through and constructing the style guide was. I ran and did an audit on the site, and I actually ended up doing this on my own time. It took maybe half a day to a day or so to go through and just kind of review the entire site, hit every interaction, check every modal, because it was an application that we were working from. The results weren't truthfully horrible. Buttons are one of maybe the worst examples. You see we have quite a few different ones there that half of them I'm not even sure what they actually do any longer. And I was able to go through and present this to our application team and just kind of state my case for why we needed to invest a little bit more time in this. This is an ongoing project. We have an ongoing pool of hours that we're able to go through and work with. The client is very ambitious with their plan for the future moving forward. And I've been working on this almost consistently for the last year and a half. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So there's really no time like now to go through and start finding some more efficiencies in the way that we're going through building things. And I was able to actually use this to get design and strategy on board with me for it. When our chief experience officer started kind of getting eyes on this, he's a bit fanatical about design consistency and user experience. And when I started pointing out some of these little things that have kind of creeped into the design over the last 18 months that we've been working on it, he freaked out a little bit. And then when he calmed down about it, he realized, like, yes, there are ways that we can go through, considering we have this long runway to continue evolving the product, to not only help ourselves by going through making the process a little bit more efficient, but also help our client by giving the users of this product a better experience. So what I produced from that, it's really cool now. What I produced from that was a first incarnation of a style guide for this product. This one is actually static HTML, linked to live CSS, again, critical for going through and doing that. I'm a bit of a masochist when it comes to going through and building things like this, so I had to go through and make it pretty very quickly. It also helped me to be able to go through and sell the idea of it a little bit better to the designers if it looked better. But the other benefit of it is that this is something that we can actually talk with the client. This is something that, because it's linked to live CSS that runs the product itself, the colors, the typography, the composition of the layout itself actually comes from the product itself. So it feels like something that belongs with the product that is the client's product. So here we're kind of looking at the top of this massive style guide, which might look a little bit familiar to some of the stuff I showed earlier, but what we're now looking at, instead of elements that are wrapped up in layouts and just run down the page based on what I saw in Photoshop, what we're looking at now is a chunk of element after element after element with code samples and descriptions and references to SAS files on how to go through and use them down into more complex components. The top here is giving some samples of color palettes and instructions on how to use the guide itself. If we scroll down kind of to some juicy parts of it, this one is specific for a form element component. So we're feeding in, where do you find the SAS file that houses the elements and components, the elements that make up this component. We talked a little bit about the usage, where you would go through and apply it. Some optional elements that can come and go from the sample that we've provided here. We have a live example of what it looks like. Again, a component that's made up of multiple elements, a label, a field, a button with an icon, and another label kind of attached to the end of the input.
Is that a single page, Brian?
I'm sorry?
The thing on the left, is that a single page?
That is a single page, yes. Yeah.
And is this, assuming it's SDI's thing, is it on one of their sites?
This lives on, so this one right now is not public technically, but it will ultimately become a public resource. But it does live just kind of tucked away on their site right now. So you know exactly where to find it. What is it?
If you're drawing from their style sheet, you have to be on their site.
I would say again.
If you are drawing from their style sheet, then you'd have to be on their site. Else you'd have to keep updating the style sheet.
Yeah. It lives with it. It's just not part of like something that's publicly accessible.
Okay.
So by going through and constructing it this way, we're able to go through and provide insight. We're able to provide documentation for people that would be coming in on the team, trying to interact with it, going through and building prototypes or page compositions from these particular elements. Jana stole a little bit of my thunder earlier, actually, but a little bit about the technology behind it. Two add-ons that we're using that really kind of improved the experience of the style guide itself. First one is X-ray HTML, which you can hit on the Filament Group's GitHub page. The way that works is it actually displays a code block from markup that is actually on the site, so you don't have to duplicate the markup itself. And then as Jana touched on, the other one that we're using there is Prism.js, and that's adding the sexy code highlighting that's happening down here in that code sample. Just on those two real quick, just to show them off a little bit. The X-ray HTML wrapper is literally, it's a JS add-on that you put onto the site. This one, we have a special file that goes through and renders out JS and CSS that might be exclusive to the style guide, so it's not kind of punishing the client for us trying to make this a little bit more readable. But basically, any snippet that you have, you go through and wrap in a div with a data attribute of X-ray HTML, and the JavaScript will go through and actually grab that snippet and render both a live browser sample as well as the code snippet. And then Prism.js steps in once that code snippet is rendered and adds all of the syntax highlighting. Really great kind of combo for going through and managing it. There's another add-on that we've been tinkering with. It's actually a little copy and paste piece that we can add to it, just to make it a little bit easier to move code snippets from here into the site itself. And the one thing that's beautiful about this, again, with the style guide itself and with the product, we want it to be as dry as possible. We don't want to be repeating ourselves with things. And that was kind of why we went exploring and trying to find some of these kinds of tools. Instead of having to have two samples of the code that goes through and displays this particular snippet, we now have one that is duplicated out to present both the visual and the code behind it. So it makes maintaining the style guide itself a little bit easier. So a couple of the results that we had from everything. We're still going through and working on it. There's still a massive chunk of it that we're working on right now. There's a lot of styles at the bottom that are still kind of like evolving. We have documented and undocumented sections of it. The full site CSS file, it's a pretty comprehensive app. I'm still not quite happy with where this is at. But with the few things that we've done to go through and improve the efficiency of the CSS itself, we've been able to shave off, 11 kilobytes so far. It's 11, right? Yeah. I say things, and then I'm like, shit, was that right?
What percent was that, Brian?
It's way too late for that. 11 kilobytes doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but that's going to continue to add up over time. 11 kilobytes might mean being able to add an additional JavaScript library to help manage a feature on the site. It might mean being able to add an additional image to the site. As much as we can, we try and drive that down. We've already seen some efficiencies gained in that. And then also, as far as team composition, the project was kind of limited to 3 of us working on it. We had myself as a front end, we had back end, and we had a designer. And then there was someone seagulling over top of that, keeping an eye on everything. But it made it very difficult to go through and really kind of share these code samples and have multiple people evolving it because there just wasn't enough familiarity. There wasn't a reference for how to go through and build these things. So in the last 6 months since we started experimenting with these, we've actually been able to double our team size. We now have 6 individual people working on it, a full stack, 2 back ends, front end and 2 designers. I think that adds up somewhere in there. 6 or 7 people that are kind of bouncing on and off on the project, and we're able to go through and do this without stepping on each other's toes. We're able to use the wireframes that design is producing to rapidly put together new layouts for the site, test those, ideate around those, and evolve the style guide and overall the CSS of the site itself. So next steps that we're looking to do, being rewarded for taking the extra step of going through and making the style guide look pretty and pushing hard to actually implement it, we're doing a complete UI overhaul of the entire site, which started a couple weeks ago. So the left side is what design produced from it, which is really exciting actually. Everything's going flat design, it's not a thing. So this site is going flat. And what design produced was a Photoshop style guide basically, and it almost resulted in some really awkward inter-office hugging happening. He was able to use my style guide, the living style guide, to create a new Photoshop version with just the elements themselves to know exactly what elements he needed to go through and skin with the new UI. And this will in turn influence what we do with the next version of the style guide itself, which I'm hoping will actually be built in Jekyll. I've actually started going through building it already with the idea that we'll be able to, instead of having a gigantic HTML file with all of these samples, we'll be able to break these out a little bit, organize them a little bit better, and allow both business strategy, UX, design, and development to work in the documentation of it and produce a final style guide. So we covered a lot of ground. We covered a lot of ground. Is everybody okay? We do have a couple resources that we wanted to touch on. I mean, you know, Jana and I have done an immense amount of research into this, and we certainly want to go through and share kind of like where we have been finding some of these things and kind of what inspired us to go through and share this information. StyleGuides.io, I really kind of consider this to be the holy grail if you want to geek out really hardcore on style guides. Incredible collection of articles, books, presentations, and they actually just started a podcast. I think maybe they're 7 or 8 into it at this point, but incredible resource if you want to learn a little bit more about style guides themselves. Jana and I showed off some examples of static and that I'm working on a Jekyll version of it. We did mention that there's some style guide generators out there. Susan Robertson just wrote an list of hard article that was a roundup of everything. She touches on a bunch of different options depending on the platform and languages that you're comfortable with. A couple of the more popular ones are Neat, KSS, or Hologram. Both of them are interesting ideas. Jana and I are not particularly a fan of them. Not
No,
taking words out of your mouth?
no, you're not taking words out of my mouth.
You're still not a fan.
Nope, still not a fan.
They both work off the idea of formatting your CSS and HTML with additional markup to automatically generate this documentation. And truthfully, I just don't want extraneous stuff in there. It's really not that much more difficult to go through and document it on my own.
Yeah, I'm a control freak, so I prefer having complete control over everything that I'm working with, and I feel like I'm surrendering a lot of my control using the generators.
Exactly. So like I said, we're not fans, but if you're looking for a quick way to go through and spin up on it, it might be the one for you. 2 great foundational articles. These are a couple years old, both at this point, but A List Apart had one on creating style guides, and then 24 Ways had a great one a couple years ago during the holidays that both touched on front-end style guides. Anna Debenham, who was one of the authors of a post on the previous one, also authored a pocket guide. It's about 60 or 70 pages or so for a digital copy of it. It's like $3 or something, so it's like an evening read. But she touches on kind of like her journey through it and resources and some of the things that Jana and I touched on as far as getting buy-in and evolving it inside of your company's culture.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, these are some of the resources on code standards. I've personally used the one on the right, idiomatic CSS. It's absolutely fantastic. It goes through pretty much every single question you might have about CSS. And the other 2 articles from CSS Tricks and Sebronell, they go into detail about, you know, why you want to do things in a certain way and the reasons for that. And there's a lot of different ways to write CSS. So, you know, pick the one that works for you, read these articles, and then pick a method and stick to it. Here are a couple of fun style guide loving people that I definitely suggest that you follow on Twitter. And do you want to speak to that?
No. These people just really know their stuff. If you're really interested in the idea of style guides, these are definitely a few of the key folks to
you missed
follow.
my handle on there.
Your hand? Oh, yeah. We should add ourselves to that, actually.
Well, thanks everybody for coming today, and do you have any questions for us?
Oh, man.
Whoa.
Right.
First question is, will you share your slides?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. It's a lot of slides. We might break SlideShare if we upload it. But yes.
We'll send the link out for the SlideShare on the PANMA Facebook page after that's up. So.
Yeah, and you can also hit us up, you know, on Twitter or email or however you desire. In person later. Yeah, that's it.
We'll be hanging around. Yes, Greg.
Brian, your style sheet was immaculate and it looked really good.
He has to say that. It's different.
So I work with Brian.
two-part question for
Yes.
you. How do you determine how to style your style guide? Does it have a style guide? And in that case, how do you style your style guide for your style guide?
That's really meta. It's an interesting question. I hadn't thought too much about it just because, I mean, the style guide itself, as Jana kind of touched on, isn't really meant to be this beautiful resource. In going through and having it set up so that it adopts the CSS of the site, you kind of gain a little bit of that, of the design of the site itself. So it kind of feels like it belongs, and that's kind of what I was looking for in going through and building it. But beyond that, I honestly don't know how much further you would want to go with being like, you know, this is how we define the look of a style guide, let's say.
I generally go through it, and whatever part of the project I'm on, if I'm working on that, it goes in the style guide. So let's say I'm working on a component, and it has 2 different types of buttons. I, take those buttons, I create those buttons first, and I pop them into the buttons section. Then I take the component, I pop those buttons in that I just created, and I create the component. So it really depends on what my workflow is like, what has been created before, and then I kind of try to put it into bucket categories. So like nav elements and, accordion menus or whatever else. But it really depends on what my workflow is like. And I feel like by tying yourself down to creating a style guide in a certain way, you're limiting yourself rather than allowing more interaction with the style guide itself.
Right. Keep it simple, keep it flexible.
Yeah, keep it flexible, and keep it iterative. As you get more designs, update your buttons that needed updating. Put in more components. What's up?
So when you do updates to the style guide, the platform that you're using, does it update your team on what's getting updated, or do you manually send out emails saying, I just updated the button?
No, I do not, because that would mean that I would be sending out an email at least 3 times a day to my team. It's kind of expected that everybody, if you're touching on CSS, that you look at the style guide and what's going on in there. Our designer shares out designs, and whatever's being worked on, whatever needs to be worked on, will go in the style guide. So there's knowledge that, that style guide is being worked on. So there's really no reason to send out emails, okay, well, we just updated this, we just updated that. Because if you open up the style guide, you'll see what was updated and what wasn't. And then it's really up to the project managers to make sure that work gets divvied up so that you don't step on anybody's toes.
Yeah. The hope with going through and doing this is not that you are kind of like in somebody's face reminding them that the style guide exists. You kind of want to position it so that they recognize the value in the style guide and it becomes kind of an integral part of their workflow. Like, they don't necessarily need to know every individual thing that was updated because they'll just see it as they're interacting with it. Yep.
What do you think to be your sweet spot on updating the style guide? Do you do it like as you make changes all the time, or is it like once a week doing the whole batch that you change that?
This is a really great question. So the way I structure my workflow is I do it first and foremost. I generally look at what kind of markup I have to work with, whether I need to create a directive or something to manage some sort of interaction on our site. So the product is a single page app run by Angular, so I have to make sure that the functionality exists. If it doesn't exist, I usually go and create, the directive first. If it does exist, then I look at the structure of the directive. I kind of try to mimic that within the style guide, just using plain markup, and then I create the component within the style guide itself. So that way I can kind of do a visual check. Okay, well, does this work in this particular scenario? And then I transfer those styles over to our production site. And that's also because I'm doing iterative changes on a live site. So every single thing that I do goes live absolutely immediately. So I don't have the luxury of having like a staging environment. So I also use the style guide as a way to make sure that everything is okay. So I always put things first and foremost into my little visual library.
No staging about it. That's terrifying. Yeah, we actually do have a staging environment for all of our sites, and our style guide really acts as our proving ground when we're going through and building or evolving components for the site. It's where we, as Jana kind of touched on one of her slides, it's kind of our playground. We go in there and play with ideas, we play with concepts on how to evolve an element, we'll add interactions for new components to kind of see how they work. We've actually done a little bit of testing directly in the style guide as well, when we didn't actually have a full page composition to work from. So, you know, as much as possible, we've made, for these couple particular apps that are using it, we've made it basically the first stopping point in the process of going through and actually vetting the addition or the evolution of elements and components for this product.
I've worked with a couple designers who like to use different prototyping tools that are out there. Can you guys talk about any experiences you might have working with some of those prototyping tools that let you export the CSS and the markup? And then if you found any that let you keep in sync, you know, all your changes so that the prototype, your lifestyle guide, and the site are all reflecting the same thing when you come to a consensus on what the changes are.
That's an interesting question, actually. I don't have any experience with a system.
Yeah, I don't either. Like I mentioned earlier, I really hate giving up control of things. I'm really, really very particular about the way things are structured and making sure that, you know, code is perfectly adhered to, that the spacing is exact. And doing something like that for me personally would mean, you know, giving up a lot of that control. And because I'm a anal control freak, that doesn't really work out very well for me. So I don't have too much experience with that. I usually have a designer give me an actual design and then I translate it into CSS.
So on the flip side, because I'm a developer too,
yeah.
Manager, some of the projects I've worked on in the past, they built a prototype, and then we have to build everything out from scratch from there. Do you think it's worthwhile having that prototype to show all the interaction up front when the designer's showing their comps and their mock-ups and the actual interactive states to the clients? Or do you think it's better off that rather than use a prototyping tool, it goes straight to the development teams to build that prototype in the lifestyle guide?
I love the idea of going through and prototyping things, in all honesty. We prototype quite a few like little apps, interactions, things like that we're going to be tinkering with. Some of them fit directly in the style guide, some of them don't. You know, our experience with it has really been kind of driven by how we're going to use that prototype. Anything that starts off as a prototype for us generally, though, is not what we would consider to be production level code. So if it's something that's kind of so far removed from something that's established in the style guide already, we might not even work directly in it because we're not actually even styling anything at that point. We'll go through and build it outside of there, test it, ideate around it, evolve it. And when we kind of reach a good point where we're like, you know, this is kind of the interaction that we're looking for, then we'll, you know, basically reconstruct it in the style guide with production level code.
Oh, I love interactive prototypes. I think they're absolutely fantastic, and they create a great communication tool. But they're, you know, they're a little different than putting together a style guide. I think the style guide is really the next step after that. But interactive prototypes definitely have their place, and I would encourage everybody to use them if possible. What's up?
So, usually a designer has a style guide when they design one, but my question is, in between state of creating a style guide, a static style guide from a designer and developing, the client wants to see more than a static consistency. I believe they want to see animations. Do you believe in a style guide for animations, since it's a big deal right now as a selling point? Like a consistency of one library, how many libraries you want, and just showing that that's part of the style guide?
I mean, sure. For me, that kind of thing could be a toss-up. You know, if that animation would take a certain amount of development time, it may or may not be worth it. If it's something just to show to your client, why not just pop it in the style guide? I mean, it definitely has its place in it. You know, different interactions between button sliders, for example. That's a great interaction. That's not terribly hard to do. That you can definitely show. It's a wonderful animation to show. If you want to create like a 3D polygons that are like rotating around, probably not the best thing to use the style guide for, just to get approval for something. In that case, you might want a static thing just because of the time it would take to create something like that.
But that's really a toss-up in my opinion. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that kind of goes back a little bit to maybe the prototype idea. Is like, when you're going through and constructing it, like how finalized is it? Like, or is it something that you're kind of finding your way with? As far as going through and demonstrating like higher level interactions and animations and things like that, if it's something that is more of an established element that you're evolving, or that you've kind of already jumped through the hoops of like, we've already defined functionality, we've already defined the layout and the design for it, then I don't see any reason why it couldn't go into your style guide, because you've kind of already done the vetting for it at that point. And having it documented there, it might tie to existing elements, it might incorporate existing elements, just makes it a little bit easier to maintain if you're at that point in the development of it.
The reason why I asked that question is usually like the client do not exactly know what they want. So I believe
usually
always okay. To cut down time, I believe to have like a library of style guides of animations, and it will be a better selling point and it will take your tedious work out, cut development time. Just grab that library, you already did it. It's that tedious work.
Yeah, are you talking about maybe like canned animations that you might bring in something, or
just like delay time, animation sliding down, whatever, fade in, fade out. This consistency of animation. Since CSS3 and jQuery velocity stuff like that.
I mean, truthfully, if you're looking at it that kind of a root level, and Jana, correct me if I'm wrong, like.
Oh, I will.
I know. That might be something to go through and actually incorporate into your coding standards. If it's the base of something, maybe not coding standard, maybe like your foundation style guide where you have like kind of like elements that you're going to use on every website defined. It's kind of like a starting point for you. It might be good to go through and incorporate something like that. Like we know we use this particular animation library to do interactions on all of our websites. That's something that you might go through and put in as part of your kind of like foundation style guide or foundation code standards. Say like, this is what we use, this is how you interact with it, this is part of our package, that is how we start our style guides.
Alternatively, for something of that sort, for demoing purposes, you may want to have an actual demo site. So let's say you're in e-commerce, you're working for an e-commerce company, you want to have a fake e-commerce site with product description pages, with pagination, with whatever other things that you would kind of include in that site, and that's what you can use for marketing purposes. Again, we're going back to you need to determine what the purpose of the style of this thing that you're putting together is. What I hear you talking about is more using something for the purposes of selling your product or of showing a client, something that they could have on the site. And if you have like a demo site that's already set up, that's a fantastic tool to use. And it doesn't need to be extremely complicated, it can include just a couple of different pages. But for the front-end development style guides, I feel it's more of a tool for more for internal communication, and then for the client to take a look at it if you're working for an agency or with clients if you're not working for an in-house team, or for your client's QA to take a look at these final things. But for those beginning stages, I think I would personally prefer something that showcases that kind of functionality a little bit better, and an actual demo might do that, might fulfill that purpose a little more. Hi.
Hi, first of all, the presentation was awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really curious, would it be a good or bad idea for your front-end style guide to also include some of the back-end information architecture? Should those things be at all connected since they sort of are in the overall project, or might it get too messy to do that? Have you thought about that, or?
Can I start off with this one? Yeah. So I think it's important to separate your front-end styles from your back-end, because a lot of your front-end styles can be reused on different things that your back-end can do. For example, accordion menus can be used on completely different types of menus, and that same styling can be recycled over and over again.
So you should definitely separate those things out. Now, to answer your question, you can definitely have some sort of section within the style guide that documents what sort of, back-end objects you have.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to figure, I don't think I understood your question entirely. I was ambiguous, so I just wanted to know, when you said information architecture, or were you talking about the back-end code or sort of the content strategy of the website? I didn't understand.
I think what I have in mind, and you sort of alluded to this, is like what an object is, and then how this object has different traits, and so how are objects generally handled within that back-end architecture, and then how those things might be connected to different elements on the front end to try and encourage a consistency, pardon me, in that approach throughout a project or an
Definitely,
organization.
if you wanna document that within the style guide, fantastic. Just don't mix and match. Your CSS is your styles. Do not mix it with your back-end code, because, like I said again, that makes it, you're not able to recycle it afterwards. Same reason why you wouldn't put inline styles in your markup. That's just bad. I don't mean to judge, but that's just bad.
I agree.
So yeah, no, you want to have different sections within your style guide for that, but there's different ways of doing it and documenting back-end code, and I would definitely not be the right person to speak to that.
Yeah, with the stuff that we're doing, I'm very much a front end. PHP just scares the living crap out of me. But the way that we've gone through and actually kind of found that dividing line, I guess, is one, kind of like building on what Jana said. We do go through and keep them separate. We don't have data that goes through and feeds into the style guide, just because it kind of pigeonholes some of the elements into certain types of information that it might be able to interact with. But as part of that, we do go through, in the one sample I showed you, notice that we had a section on usage. So in there, we are going through and defining, like, here's where it is appropriate to go through and use a select box for something. Here's where it is appropriate to use this type of input element, or this is the type of interaction you should expect with a field with a button attached to it. So while I'm not necessarily defining backend, like how a backend should interact with it, it is giving them some guidance on elements that are kind of like meant to work in certain types of interactions. Yes, sir.
To actually add on to what you were saying, though, I know from working on the front end, sometimes depending on the tool or the way the developers in the back end are building things, you might not have total control over how the front end code is formed. If it's a .NET application, everything's inside of a form tag, things like that. So it's important to know that when you're building your style guide, because kind of the markup may need to be structured, maybe not ideally the way you want to do it. There's some constraints on it.
This is not a replacement for communication around it. Like, definitely, like, this is an aid to improve communication around
your
it.
Style guide that you may need to know, well, in the real site, the code there may be some things you have to conform to that you might not want to, just because that's the way it's going to be. Make sure they're both the same, even though you're using the same style sheets, because of the way things are wrapped, and the developer has to throw a div around a certain section.
Yeah,
you might not necessarily want. You have to make sure that's also in your style guide.
Yeah, there's definitely a dialogue that needs to happen around that. We kind of have the luxury at O3 where we're kind of like doing some really highly customized things. So we're not working with .NET. We're like a system like that kind of dictates a little bit more the front end architecture to you. I probably would just lose my mind if it was, actually, because it produces some heinous stuff sometimes. But when you are in that kind of environment, like I said, this isn't a replacement for the dialogue, the communication that needs to happen to make sure that what you're producing, not only works from a design standpoint, from a UX standpoint, but as a front-end resource, it also works with your back-ends as well. So if a back-end says, like, here is what .NET is going to produce for me when I say I want to use this element, the front-end style guide should be built to match, that output and style it accordingly.
Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt for a minute.
Yeah.
Just a quick time check. We could take maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and if you are joining us for happy hour, if you could let the people who are not ask the questions, I think that would be really great.
Yes, sir.
Not joining us for happy hour. So I'm wondering, when you're working on a style guide, what kind of file or document are you creating, and how are you collaborating on it?
What do you mean by that exactly?
Is it a page of HTML? Is it a Word document? Is it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a page of HTML. It's just like a page. It's included within the site. You know, like Brian mentioned earlier, some of the sites might not be publicly accessible, so you need to be on a certain network in order to access it. So it might be behind a firewall. You might need to have a password in order to access it. It may only live on a staging environment. It may be completely publicly accessible, like the Starbucks site, but it's a living actual page. All right, I think we have time for two more questions over here. Two more questions.
Mine's probably less profound than his, so I'll do those mine very quickly. I'm sure it is.
Okay.
It sounds basically like you're saying, basically making an HTML page that is just tied into the same CSS, and therefore when you update the CSS, you can visit this page and see the changes appearing on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah. Make it as simple for yourself as possible.
Okay.
All right, last question.
Non-happy hour person. My question is, if you are a trainer to entry level or newbies to web development, at what level will you introduce style guide?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. I was thrown right into style guides when I first started. And I'm like, what is this crap? And I thought it was just kind of annoying at first because it was extra work that I had to do. It wasn't a lot of extra work, but it was frustrating. But really the benefit of them outweighs that frustration greatly. And as you go on learning, the style guide actually provides an extra way of practicing your code. So because you're doing some of those things twice, you have to look through the style guide, see how to reuse it. You're really learning a lot. So I suggest using it from the very beginning.
Can I add to that? The style guide, when you implement it the way that you're suggesting, it acts as a living code sample for pretty much everything you're going to want to do with the front end of your site. Sure, you're going to have to write a lot of custom code aside from that, but the difference between having to Google around to figure out how to do a particular nav style or tabs for half a day in order to do it, or to be able to just grab a sample. If the first thing you do is work on your style guide, every time you try and set up those tabs, it's going to be copy and paste, and you'll customize from there.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Thank you. Really valuable, active information. Please share your stuff. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Please come to happy hour and don't forget virtual reality.